What is going on, y'all? Robert Sykes coming back at you with their AMA Ask Me Anything. This one's brought to us by Elizabeth, and she's asking about energy sources. But before we dive into that, let's roll the intro. All right, so Elizabeth asks, protein or fat, which is best energy source for the long term? And that's a great question. So I've said it a million times, but protein in and of itself is not a great substrate for energy. So if you are doing a standard American diet, in which case glucose and sugar and carbohydrates are your primary form of energy, then obviously that would be where you go for energy. However, if you are following, which I'm assuming you are if you're listening to me, you're following more of a fat-adapted approach, a low-carb or ketogenic approach, carnivore possibly, and you are then deriving your energy from lipids, from fatty acids, from fat, from dietary fat, and from stored body fat if you have plenty of stored body fat to burn for fuel. So if you are following a ketogenic, low-carb, carnivore diet and you are trying to maximize your energy demands via fat metabolism, you do not want to leverage protein as your primary energy substrate. Because what's happening there, and I see people make this mistake all the time, they'll remove the carbohydrates from their diet because they want to do low-carb, keto, carnivore, and they don't replace that energy with ample dietary fat, even if they have enough body fat. Because if they're switching from a standard American diet to a low-carb diet, their body's metabolic processes are not yet in place to efficiently use their stored fat for fuel. So they inevitably take away their fuel source in the form of carbohydrates, and their body doesn't know how to use its own stored fuel. So then they find it to be unsustainable, they lack energy, and they deviate and eat carbs again. That's not what you want to do. If you're removing carbs as your fuel energy source, you need to replace that with ample dietary fat in the beginning, even if you have body fat to lose. Once those metabolic processes are in place and your body upregulates those pathways to use fat as a fuel substrate, and then you can start to play around with what distribution of fat and proteins your body responds best to. But don't strip away your energy source in the form of carbs and not replace it with ample dietary fat. Now, once you're dealing with only protein or fat, which of those is the best energy source? Again, protein is not a great substrate for energy. What happens in the context of excessive protein relative to dietary fat is your body will go through gluconeogenesis, which is, again, totally normal process that we shouldn't be fearful of, but too much protein relative to dietary fat is going to result in unnecessary levels of gluconeogenesis that do hinder your energy demands. Now, some people are of the opinion that gluconeogenesis is demand-driven, not supply-driven, and there's a lot of good research to indicate that is in fact the case. However, if you are consuming if you've only got so many calories to work with, as we all do, whether you're in a building phase or a cutting phase, there is a caloric allotment that's going to be best for your goals. And if you've only got so many calories to tap into, it doesn't make sense to have excessive protein and deficient dietary fat coming in, because then your energy demands are going to be hindered. Your energy substrate is going to be diminished. You don't want that. So I always encourage people to look for fat as the primary fuel substrate if you are tackling this from a ketogenic or carnivore or low-carb approach. Make sure you're consuming ample dietary fat, and then titrate the protein up until you figure out what that protein threshold for you is. Once you start to increase that protein and start to see a diminishing return on your energy levels, then you can feel relatively confident, okay, any protein beyond this amount likely isn't beneficial. There's a point of diminishing return there. That's not to villainize protein at all. We have to have ample protein, but there is definitely an upper ceiling or threshold to that protein, and anything beyond that is doing you more harm than good from an energy standpoint. So I do not recommend excessive protein in that context. Hopefully that answered your question, Elizabeth. You asked for some chocolate malt keto bricks. I've got some of those headed your way. For anybody that does not know how these AMA videos work, if you submit me a well thought out question via the link in the description below and I use your question, I will send you some free keto bricks with a flavor of your choosing. Thank you for tuning in. Talk to you next time.